Good evening. I'd like to call to order this regular board meeting for the Round Lake Area School District Board of Education on March the 20th, 2023 at 7 p.m. here in the John T. McGee cafeteria. If I can get started first with a roll call, please.
Mrs. McGinley?
Here.
Mr. Francisco?
Here.
Mr. De Vera?
Here.
Miss Lee?
Here.
Mrs. Larson?
Here.
Mr. Jewett? Mrs. Klingler?
Here.
And let's start with a Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, first up is an approval of meeting agenda. If I can get a motion to approve.
So moved. Second.
Motion by Ms. Klingler, seconded by Mr. Jewett. Roll call, please.
Mrs. McGinley?
Yes.
Mr. Francisco?
Yes.
Mr. De Vera?
Yes.
Miss Lee?
Yes.
Mrs. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. Jewett?
Yes.
Mrs. Klingler?
Yes.
All right, we have an approved agenda. If I could just remind the board to please remove all cell phones from the tables, and if we can have all cell phones on silent or vibrate. And first up is communications to the board, and our first is our CEDAW Governing Board recap. Ms. Larson.
Okay, well, I will be short and sweet. We had a meeting, and we approved the sale, or not the sale, the purchase of Fairhaven School. So CEDAW has been renting it for quite a while, and they had to do some extensive modifications for their students, and so they were able to purchase it outright. So it's quite a big win for CEDAW.
Any questions for Ms. Larson in regards to CEDAW or the CEDAW recap? Hearing none, thank you very much. Next up, just for the board, it's the March 23 Strategic Plan Monthly Update. The update was in the packet. Does the board have any questions for administration? All right, hearing none. Next up, we'll go to review of the contracts less than 1,000. I do see we do have some. I'll open the questions on this one, and again, this is just probably my pet peeve more than anything else. I definitely understand it's 3 different schools, but it's the same entity for the same amount on virtually the same dates. So I'm at a little bit of a loss of how it's 3 contracts, but.
So these are 3 separate, this is reviewed at finance. These are 3 separate performances by the same company. It's uno, dos, tres, Andres. So and they come out of 3 separate budgets. Each school has to negotiate for themselves. So that's why you see it 3 separate times.
Thank you for that clarification. Any additional questions? Perfect. All right, next up then is the superintendent's report. Dr. Mendoza.
Thank you, Board President Francisco and Board of Education. Last week, the Round Lake Action Congress convened at the Round Lake Beach Cultural and Civic Center. The Round Lake High School Honors Community Civics class met with students in grades 4 through 12 to continue their planning efforts directed at 3 specific projects. First, police community relations, continuation of the Spark Enrichment Program, and Earth Day projects at elementary schools. Also, for your convenience in the update, as usual, we provide a list of donations, and so tonight we'd like to thank Ironwood Industries for a $200 donation to the Round Lake High School football program. And also, just as a gentle reminder, next week is spring break, which starts on Monday, March 27th through Friday, March 31st. All offices, with the exception of the Welcome Center, will be closed to the public. Welcome Center office hours will be 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. That concludes the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Dr. Mendoza. Any questions for the superintendent's report? Hearing none, we'll move on now to committee reports, and first up is our Finance Committee update.
Thank you. Yes, the Finance Committee met earlier this evening, and so as past practice, I'll cover the agenda items that are not going to be on the board agenda for this evening. So first, we have the Brazen contract, which is through our HR department. This is a virtual job fair. We started doing this, obviously, during the pandemic when we couldn't attend job fairs. So this virtual job fair proved to be fruitful for the district in filling hard-to-fill positions, having a greater reach, and they can also use this for training as well, and in getting reaching out specific targets, whether it be subs, ENL, special ed. So they want to continue that contract for the rest of this school year and the 2023 and 2024 school year. High school graduation, that is right around the corner. So Dan and his team are working with TC Furlong, is the company we used last year for the sound system and speakers for our speakers at the graduation. We are working for obviously the 2 middle schools and the high school. During some questions during the Finance Committee, they will be going back to TC Furlong to get some clarification. As you know, currently the middle school is scheduled to be inside at the gymnasium, and some of you may know the upper bleachers are currently not working or fixed. So they are to be fixed by April 15th, but that is not confirmed. Should they not be able to be fixed, then we need to move 8th grade graduation outside. So we need to go back to TC Furlong. Also, as we know, last year it was a rather wet graduation. We want to make sure if we had to move high school back inside, we have that in the contract as well. So they need to go back and do some negotiations, and that will be coming forward later. E-rate, again, Mr. Kozak and his team working on E-rate. Our current E-rate expires this year, June 2023. So we are working on a 3-year multi-year contract for our E-rate. However, the Welcome Center, as you know, because that is not our facility, we're only doing a 1-year contract for that. Next is it's crash bar alarms with Magnalocks integration. This is currently being requested for the high school. It is funded by a grant. This would be on all the high school doors with the exception of a couple like Teacher's Lounge and the boiler room. So this would be, if anyone tries to open the door, we do know the high school has a lot of doors to maintain and manage, and we don't have somebody at every door. So if somebody was to open that door, it would sound an alarm. So it's to provide an extra layer of security. Finance Committee had asked about putting those at the middle schools. However, this is covered by a grant, and administration wants to put it in the high school, which it'll be for the fall, be ready for the fall semester of this year, and see how that works, and they'll come back with a report to the board, and then see about moving forward with the middle school and then possibly the elementary. And then we cover the contracts under 1,000. And then just to inform the board, under some of the informational items on the committee report, the 2023-2024 budget assumptions, process, and timeline, that will be coming forward in the April board meeting. And then we reconvene in May. As you know, the high school theater sound system is completely done now, so we will be visiting the theater so we can get a demonstration of that. And that covers finance. Any questions?
Hearing none, thank you very much. All right, next up is consent agenda.
All right, I need a motion to approve the consent agenda for the March 2023 employment report, the accounts payable report for $1,650,473.94, the previous motions report for $162,972.24, and the February 2023 treasurer's report and the February 2023 P-card report. So moved.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Lee, seconded by Ms. Larson. Any questions? Roll call, please.
Mrs. McGinley,
Yes.
Mr. Francisco,
Yes.
Mr. De Vera,
Yes.
Miss Lee,
Yes.
Mrs. Larson,
Yes.
Mr. Jewett,
Yes.
Mrs. Klingler,
Yes.
Motion carries. All right, that's going to bring us to new business, and first up on new business is the elementary school configuration presentation.
So just a couple of opening comments for the board and public prior to Dr. Center starting a presentation. I just wanted to provide a high-level overview of what the purpose is of the evening to provide some structure. Three primary areas that we'd like to cover tonight. One, the purpose is to share information with the board and public. Two, we'd like to answer questions that you as a board have. So certainly members of the leadership team will be either answering them or going to find answers to the questions if we're unable to provide that tonight. And lastly, if there's additional information that the board would like to see between now and the April 10th meeting, we'll certainly secure that for you. Respectfully, what we'd like to do just to keep the presentation going is if you could, as board members, write your questions down during the presentation. That way at the end we can come back and answer those. And just to provide a little, just a gentle reminder for the public who may be watching. The primary purpose is to, we're solving for a problem. The problem is bringing our kindergarten students back. The students have been gone, give or take, for about 8 years. And although much of the planning, especially since November, was accelerated with planning and problem solving, we knew this time would come at some point. And I think with our enrollment projections is the primary driver as to what presented us with the opportunity to eventually bring them back. I'd like to thank, I get a little nervous when I thank people because I always worry about leaving somebody out, but would like to thank the board for their patience. Definitely the at-large staff in the district, the EARL leadership team, the community for the input they gave during this process. I think we're at a different place than we were when you first saw this, and so we have in fact incorporated feedback into the solutions that we've tried to develop. We know this is a hard situation. Change is hard. It always is. But I think part of why we're coming to you is so that people have time to plan. So just as a gentle reminder, you know, this, whatever you decide, whatever you vote on April 10th, will be implemented in the fall of '24. So it gives people time to plan. We've tried to be as transparent as possible throughout the entire process. And so again, I want to thank the leadership team as well for, it's been a heavy lift in the sense that there's been a lot of time for a lot of people. And so we're just going to get to it now. So Dr. Center, I'll defer to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to present this, what we hope to be mostly final information regarding the school configuration strategic initiative. As Dr. Mendoza noted, we've gone through various iterations in planning stages after feedback from staff and from families in the community. And so, you know, there's always probably something out there that we need to make sure we consider, but we believe we've covered the vast majority of the bases at this point. When we began this conversation nearly a year ago, we provided our initial information based on enrollment reports and a feasibility study by the architects, and then to the greatest extent possible, now we believe we have fitted in most of the pieces of the puzzle. So Ms. Bennett will be providing information regarding the process we use to secure feedback from staff and community. She'll also share information regarding questions asked and answers provided. And then I'll provide information relating to the school configuration itself, and then both practical teaching and learning considerations in addition to some practical implications. Alrighty, so the content of this presentation. All right, and had to adjust. So tonight's presentation will cover information regarding the process used to provide, or receive information, I should say, from staff and community, including timeline, communication methods, and frequency, parent-student feedback, including questions asked and answered. We'll discuss enrollment trends and projections, costs for school configuration models, overall impacts for each model, and additionally some considerations for the board's decision in April. Finally, Dr. Mendoza will close the presentation with some final comments. And as Dr. Mendoza noted, in order to be efficient with our time, if we could hold questions to the end, that would be fantastic. So starting first with communication.
Okay, so as Dr. Mendoza noted, we have known that we've had this 10-year agreement with Lake Villa Elementary School District for some time, so we knew that we were nearing the end of our term of that agreement. Probably 3 years ago now, Teaching and Learning began the conversations about the types of configurations that we might be able to consider. So while we got moving on conversations with staff and families this year, this conversation has been taking place for quite some time now. On this slide, we began meeting with staff around November and concluded meeting with staff, families, and then staff again in March. The different types of communication methods are listed on this slide that we used throughout that process. Okay, so this slide is for our parent feedback. So we held 22 individual sessions with families this fall, winter, I guess, December into January. We held 11 in English and 11 in Spanish, 15 in person, 7 virtual, and then counting up the number of attendees at each, with a handful being duplicates at multiple sessions. We had about 144 attendees at those events. Down at the bottom of this slide, there's a link to a feedback report, and if you refer to pages 2 through 12, we list all of the feedback and questions that we received from parents throughout those sessions that we presented. There are answers to some of those questions listed, and we also noted any of the questions or feedback that were provided that were mentioned multiple times, so that you might see a bolded number at the end of a specific topic. I did pull out common themes from the parent feedback sessions. This is not all of them, but the major ones are noted here. The shuttle bus concept, support for students and staff if we were to move into a partner school model, how they would be supported during that transition. Parents did express on multiple occasions that they were wondering why we couldn't continue with that kindergarten-only school format that we have had for the last several years. They expressed wanting to select a sustainable school configuration model and how their feedback was going to be utilized throughout this process. I do want to note that the responses to the questions that are listed on that report were completed in February. And then on the next slide, we'll look at a link to the staff, which was done a little bit earlier on. So we didn't go back and change responses to the questions. And so that might be a little bit confusing, but we were able to make some changes throughout the planning process based on the feedback that we were receiving throughout those sessions. So there may be variations on how those responses were prepared depending on the time that they were entered into that format. And then over on the right-hand side, you see the types of communications that we utilized for all of those parent feedback sessions and the types of communications that we sent out. The next is our staff feedback slide. So we did host 7 voluntary staff meetings at our pre-K through 5 buildings from November through early December. We did offer in-person and hybrid for those sessions. So we did have a live Zoom link going at those sessions for staff who were not able to attend. We also opened all those sessions up to any staff member across the district. So just because we're holding one at, say, Indian Hill, a staff member from any other building could attend by Zoom or in person at those different sessions. We held Teaching and Learning EARL meetings, or Education Association of Round Lake, ongoing meetings from October through March to discuss various parts of this planning process. And just to note, and I'm sure Susan will as well, it's been a very collaborative conversation throughout this entire process with our Education Association. Again, a link to the comprehensive staff feedback report, pages 13 through 7 on that link there. And we pulled out common themes again. So high interest in how that move or the transfer of staff would work in either model. So we discussed that. Climate and culture was a big theme. Making the changes to our current school configuration. We've had staff working in buildings, in their own buildings for a long time, so that is something to consider. They expressed shuttle bus concept concerns, wanted to know additional information about the enrollment projections and how that might impact how we move forward into the future. And again, just as the parents, what type of support would we be providing in those transitions, depending on the model that we moved into. And then on the right-hand side again, the different types of communications that we provided throughout that process.
The following section reviews the enrollment projections used to inform STR's building feasibility study that we used in our initial work and presentation that you guys saw actually last May. And then we'll also discuss observations regarding current enrollment and what district administration predicts regarding enrollment trends. So this is a summary slide. The green at the top, the 5-year trend projection, is the enrollment trend projection that was used by STR to conduct the building feasibility study. It's the one that the University of Wisconsin Applied Population Laboratory suggested was likely to be the most accurate. The kindergarten trend projection is also in the same report that we received from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. They configure kindergarten trends a little bit different because there isn't historical data for kindergarten trends other than the number of kids who have attended kindergarten. So they have a slightly different methodology they used for kindergarten trend. So that number is incorporated here. And then what we've called the adjusted Round Lake Area Schools trend projection, which has to do with our current enrollment, what we're seeing in our current enrollment, and location of students throughout the district, including that kindergarten trend projection. So in talking about one of the reasons we looked at looking for us, what do we think the trend is going to be, is one of the questions we got regularly from staff is, what if we don't hit? Right? What if we don't hit that green projection, the 5-year projection, and we end up with more students? What's the plan, right? So we wanted to make sure that we took a look at that and said, okay, if that isn't going to hit, where do we think we might be? If we're not heading in that direction, what's the reason? So the impetus for creating it was we're currently exceeding that 5-year projection. In other words, we're over the number of students that were expected at this time, and we want to make sure that we, as Dr. Mendoza says, we can have too many spaces, but we can't have not enough, right? So if we have students with nowhere to go, that is a problem. So we want to make sure we're cautious about not having so many students we don't have a location for them. And then we have a staffing model we use called Cohort Survival, where we take a look at the number of students who are currently in district and we roll them forward in order to prepare for our staffing. So, and that has tended to be a pretty good model for us in terms of making sure we have the right number of teachers for students. So as we go through, we'll talk about that 5-year trend projection and that adjusted trend projection so you guys can take get a feel for both. So the original study was done by the University of Wisconsin at Madison, the Applied Population Laboratory. That's what the UWAPL you'll see throughout this presentation is. It's a lot to type out, University of Wisconsin Applied Population Laboratory, so we just wanted to abbreviate it. But this is their methodology. Basically, they use a grade progression ratio. So they do use cohort survival as a portion of what they do, but they also then look into birth rates, transfer rates, and they create that grade progression ratio. So in other words, what are the rates of transfer that are occurring in addition to cohort survival? So they take the number of students move them forward, but also apply that rate of transfer percentage to adjust the population. So that's why they give you a 3-year, a 5-year, and a 10-year projection, because it includes that rates of transfer. As I noted earlier, kindergarten projections use a slightly different method. They look at kindergarten long-term enrollment trend, and then what they call trend it forward. So they say, how many kids have you been getting in kindergarten, and what do we expect that to be moving forward? So it's a slightly different model because they don't have rates of transfer data, because they haven't been in school yet. So that's the method that's used by the University of Wisconsin. So these are numbers from that population study that STR used in their building feasibility study. So the numbers you see here, K1, 2, 3, 4, 5, for each of the elementary schools are numbers that are predicted based on the University of Wisconsin's enrollment study. That average per space is a calculation that we used in order to talk about school boundaries, because one of the questions was, where are the kids at? How much space do we need in each building? So this is a sort of like generic boundary discussion. It is not a how many classrooms do we need discussion. So I want to be clear about that, because in this calculation, we don't take into account grade level, special education, language learner. We simply imagine this: 430 beach students are all standing in the gym, and we want to divide them up evenly in every classroom we have. So we say U20 here, U20 there, U20, we don't, right, nothing else is in consideration. We're simply taking the number of students and dividing them by the number of classrooms. And the reason we want to do that is to get a sense of how crowded any school is. Because the more students you have packing those classrooms, the more crowded the school is, right? Because we know we have a class cap of 29. So if my average is about 19 kids per class, that's good. We have a lot of space for kids to move in, a lot of opportunity. If we're starting to push up to like 25, 26, 27 kids per class, now we're crowded, right? Because I don't have as much space to move in. So I want to be really clear that this is a very different calculation from the calculation needed to determine specifically how many classrooms we need. Because then I have to know how many kids are first graders, and of the first graders, how many have language needs, how many have special ed needs, right? I have to do that. It's much more precise. This is really just a general, how crowded is the school look, okay? If you have questions, we can cover them, but I just want to make sure. So in the projection from the University of Wisconsin, what you'll see actually is a pretty even distribution. So an average number of students per space in Beach, Indian Hill, Ellis, etc., is actually overall fairly balanced, right? So Ellis, however, would be considered, I think, underused, given the size of the building and the fact that there are only about 18 kids per class. And then if you wanted to look at, say, Indian Hill and Murphy, you might say, okay, well, they have a little bit more kids per class. So if we want to balance that out and have a closer, like more consistent number of students per classroom, you could take students from Indian Hill's boundary, students from Murphy's boundary, and move them into the Ellis boundary. So you could try to get everyone in that like sort of 21, 20 or whatever. So Ellis then isn't underutilized, Indian Hill and Murphy aren't over. Though I would say with these numbers, if this was the actual projection, that's not as big of a concern, but you could balance. So then you would just take, it's probably about 30 to 60 kids from Indian Hill and about 30 to 60 kids from Murphy, and you would just move them. You could adjust then through there.
I think that's really important. Again, it's not a precise exercise, but what it does show is which schools would be impacted by the boundary change, if there was one, correct?
Correct. So again, it is a generic calculation, but because students for 2 grades, like the incoming kindergarten next year and incoming the following year, don't live here, we can't run a precise, we don't know where they live, right? So if I don't know how many students are in each boundary, it can't be a precise calculation at this time. So we're just giving you a general sense. So the other enrollment projection, which we're calling our RLAS adjusted projection, is based on that concept of cohort survival that we use. So it's fairly simple. We take the number of students who exist right now and we roll them forward. That is what we do when we're looking at staffing. So if there's 400, or 87 kids in fourth grade, then there'll be 87 kids in fifth grade in that building, right? Nice and simple, roll it forward. So we also then had to make assumptions about kindergarten enrollment, right? Because we don't have kindergarten next year yet, and we don't have kindergarten the following year. So we based it off of two things, really. We took a look at kind of where kindergarten has been and where we were projected to be. And so kindergarten, we've had as much as 470, 450 kindergartners in the past. Lately, we've been closer to that 400 number, and the prediction was for 350. So we said, okay, if we're not really hitting the number, but we're not like skyrocketing over it, let's look at that midpoint. And then we balanced that with that kindergarten trend projection that was in the University of Wisconsin's report. So it was what we were seeing on the ground in real-time enrollment, plus that projection from the University of Wisconsin that focused just on kindergarten, okay? So that's how we kind of like anticipated what kindergarten would look like over the next couple of years, and we approximated about 400 students. This year we had 415, so we felt good about it. So then these numbers represent that methodology, that adjusted methodology. So I forgot to mention this, but the parentheses after the school name is the number of classrooms that they have. So that's the divider. So when you look at this is a much different, and I would suggest more realistic distribution of students. Right now, we see that we do actually have more students who are on the north end of town. Then it's not an even distribution throughout. One of the things we know when we look at our school path model is that, for example, we have 100 students out of kindergarten going to Indian Hill next year. That's more students than are going to Ellis, right? So we look at that distribution. It's not that really balanced distribution that we see in the University of Wisconsin model. It's more aligned to what we're looking at here. So when we look at it from our adjusted projections based on, like I said, on what we're seeing in that cohort survival, one of the things we note is that Indian Hill is really overcrowded. And I would argue that that is the case. So Ellis has some available classrooms, Beach has some available classrooms right now, but Indian Hill really doesn't have much space. So when we're looking at this one, we're using, again, that same model where we just take the kids, sort of divide them evenly, but we can see that Indian Hill probably needs a little bit more space. So in this method, or in this enrollment projection, we want to note that we do actually want to move kids out of the Indian Hill boundaries, because Indian Hill, if you think about every classroom having 27 students, that means only like 2 kids per classroom space. So when kids start moving into the district, there isn't a lot of room to put them at Indian Hill. So right now, we're not configuring grade level, we're not configuring special ed need or whatever. So if I'm all filled up, now that displacement we talked about previously, where now we have to take, okay, second grader, you can stay here, but third grader, you gotta go over there because we don't have room for you, that starts to pile on in this scenario because they don't have as much space. So when we look at this, we would say that Indian Hill is overcrowded compared to other schools. We know Ellis is our largest school, and Beach seems to have some additional space as well. Murphy and Village are okay, and Village as our smallest school, you probably would be cautious about moving too many kids into the Village boundary because you don't want to overpopulate Village. So if we were looking at this, we would be looking at taking students from the Indian Hill boundary, moving them into the Beach boundary and the Ellis boundary, and that number would be somewhere around 130 students, so you're looking at about 80-ish towards Ellis, maybe 50-ish towards Beach, and then you would potentially also need to move some students on the sort of south part of the Ellis boundary into the Murphy boundary, so you could balance all the way across. Again, we would try to avoid moving into Village, but you're probably talking about 15 or 20 students, and you might not need to make that move, but potentially, right? Just to kind of create that more balanced overall, so you don't have one school that's really overcrowded, 2 schools that are kind of underutilized, and then 2 schools that are kind of okay, right? So again, in a very generic sort of assessment of how many kids are in each building and how much space is available, we know even currently that Indian Hill has some challenges in terms of physical space. Alrighty, costs. So I provided for you on the table, it's Excel charts, right? It's just a couple of tables. And the reason I wanted to have that for you is so that you can see the K-5 projections with each model side by side. Because we'll be going through this each model at a time, all K-5 and then all partner schools. So in front of you, you have something that compares the costs, just so you can keep track of them as we go through. And then we don't have to flip the slides back and forth. So the initial thing we started out with were costs for classrooms. So in all cases, unless it's specifically noted, we're talking about a mobile has 2 classrooms, right? So if I need 10 classrooms, I need 5 mobiles, right? Just that's how we're looking at it. So the purchase of a new mobile, again, 1 mobile equals 2 classrooms, is about $147,000. The purchase of a used mobile is about $85,000, and then there are lease options of about $2,000 or so per month, depending on the length of the lease. One of the things you'll note as we move forward is that we used the purchase of a used mobile as the number moving forward in costing out mobile classrooms, because we hit that benchmark for purchase of a used mobile after about 3 years of leasing, and at that we all agree, I should say, they're going to be around at least that long. Once you have mobiles, you don't typically get rid of them right away. So if they will be around for at least 3 years, it makes sense to purchase. And then also if we purchase them, when we remove them, we potentially have residual value we could sell them for. But if we're leasing, we just give them up. So that's why in our discussions, we agreed that that used mobile purchase was probably the right price point for moving forward. That kind of balanced that cost of leasing versus how long we would have the mobiles. Delivery and setup is about $79,000. Installation is about $257,000. That's the utilities and connecting everything and hooking it all up. Mobiles have to have bathrooms now, so there's plumbing required and things like that. And then the soil tests and permit are just based on the site. So if we put mobiles only at Murphy, for example, then it's that $22,300. If we were able to have another site in the district, say Beach, that we could fit a mobile, it would be another $22,000, right? So that is per site. So all of the costs except soil tests and permits are per mobile, okay? Then the next overall set of costs is for transportation. We can purchase, so this has to do with the idea of like, what is our transportation gonna look like? Are we gonna need more buses and more drivers in order to run particular type of routes? So we got that information. The bus purchase, $105,000. Bus lease, which is an annual cost of $18,000. And then of course we would need somebody to drive the bus. So that is $43,300 per year. So teaching and learning costs will be broken out a little more specifically in the models, but generally speaking, if we have to add new classrooms, we have to furnish them and we have to make sure they have the resources for the grade level they're teaching. So the average materials cost per new classroom is about $12,400. The average furniture cost is about $12,900. Now again, this is all dependent on sort of what we have in the district. So if we have extra, like, you know, we have 29 desks and 29 chairs, and we can put them in one of the new spaces, obviously that eliminates the furniture cost. But there's no way to tell for certain at this point how many that would be, because we don't know what the enrollment is, we don't know where everyone's gonna be. So we put the cost in, but just to balance, obviously, or if we had the resources, if we have extra reading kits and whatever, then that defrays some of the cost of starting a new classroom. But to keep everything balanced in the overall picture, we said, okay, assume a new classroom has these setup costs. And that's true in both models, right? If it's a K-5 model, it's the setup cost. If it's the partner schools model, it's the setup cost. Then, of course, there are savings. Since we're no longer leasing Plebiac, there are costs we don't have to expend anymore, right? So we don't have to pay rent, we don't have to pay for utilities, we don't have to pay insurance on it. And so that overall approximate savings is about $327,000 a year. So now going into costs per model and looking at the K-5 option first. So remember, we have two considerations for K-5. We're either going to hit that enrollment projection for the University of Wisconsin, or we're not, and we're gonna be over that and then into the adjusted enrollment, right? That's kind of where we are. So one of the things you have to think about is where you think our enrollment's gonna be, because that kind of like addresses the cost factor in moving forward. So in looking at those projections in both models for a K-5 option, the used mobile purchase costs, delivery, setup, and installation is all listed there. In the University of Wisconsin projection, they project we would need approximately 2 classrooms, which would be 1 mobile. So the setup cost is there for a single mobile, and obviously if you have 1 mobile, it's on 1 site, so that's the site cost. In the adjusted projections, we could need up to 10 additional classrooms, which would be 5 mobiles. In that case, that is the cost times 5 to get there. We also would have to consider location at this point if Murphy doesn't have an elevator and they don't have a separate cafeteria. So we have to be cautious about the number of students we can put on the Murphy campus before we start to sort of break their schedule, because they can't have lunch and PE and, you know what I mean? So that becomes an issue. So if that's the case, we would be looking at 2 sites, because we'd have to try to defray some of that student population from the Murphy campus. And so Dr. Lamping has identified we probably could fit 1 mobile, so 2 classrooms at Beach, which actually be helpful because that's closer to the north end of town where we have that higher population. So that would be another thing we would consider. So that's why on here you see 2 sites listed, because likely we would need to identify a second site in order to support the number of students at Murphy. All right, classroom cost offsets. So knowing that a $2.5 million or $2.1 million mobile cost is a lot, we wanted to say what are some offsets that we could provide so that we didn't have to spend over $2 million on purchasing and installing mobile classrooms. So here are some of the offsets. We could put art on a cart, right? So it's not just because it rhymes, but art is probably the easiest special to put on a cart. So if we did that, that would save us 5 classrooms. We'd have 1 per building, so then we would have that reduction of need, and we'd only need 5 mobile classrooms. But remember, we can only purchase them in packs of 2, so we'd end up with 6 mobile classrooms. We'd have to buy 6 in order to use 5. So that's why you see the reduction of 2 mobiles and only 4 classrooms, because that's just how they come, right? We can't get 1. If we wanted to defray that cost further, we would be considering music or PLTW on a cart. Now, the challenge with the music classrooms is some of them have pretty steep tiers. Murphy is a good example of that. So if you think about using that as a general education classroom where students have chairs, you'd be worried about them tipping over the risers and falling. So that is a significant challenge in using music classrooms in that manner. PLTW, on the other hand, has a different problem in that it doesn't really work on a cart. So we could have a STEM curriculum, but it wouldn't be the PLTW curriculum. We would have to eliminate PLTW and adopt a different STEM program that we could do on a cart. But PLTW classrooms are regular ed sort of classrooms, so they would be better fit for having students in those spaces. Now, I will tell you, we believe that having specials in a classroom is the way to go. We think that's super important. There are several reasons for that. Consistent student experience. We want to make sure that our students in one building have the same experience as everybody else, which is why you see 5 across the board. We don't want to put art on a cart only at Indian Hill, and then those kids get a substantially different art experience from the students and the rest of the district. So that's why when you say it's 5, it's 5. So if we do it in one building, we're doing it in all the buildings. We would have to change the curriculum. Art, the way the art curriculum is written now, can't be delivered with fidelity off of a cart. So we would have to do some adjustment to that curriculum, and as I noted, that would be the case with PLTW as well, and music if it was on a cart, but again, we have that classroom consideration. And ultimately, there's an impact on K-12 programming. And one of the things that we've tried to do is align our curriculum all the way through, starting in pre-K through 12. So if we change the STEM curriculum from PLTW, that's different from what then they'll get in middle school, where we have a PLTW curriculum, and then in the high school. The art curriculum is aligned, so when they make changes, it changes what they get when they prepare for art in middle school. So there are challenges to putting any of the specials on a cart, and I want to be clear about what those challenges are. So it does offset cost, but it does create other problems on the back end. So this is all of these choices are about looking at kind of like, here's what it is, here's the cost, and that kind of cost-benefit analysis. So I want to make sure that we're pointing out kind of the pros and cons on both sides. All right. So then the next section is transportation. So in our discussions, we identified that there was a preference for having all elementary buildings have the same school start time, rather than having them be separate. This provides a lot of consistency for our families, and also it helps maintain the integrity of our teacher collaboration time, which is really important, especially because we teach third grade in multiple buildings, and it's nice for third grade teachers to have the opportunity to communicate. It's particularly helpful for our specialist teachers. When I'm the only art teacher at Village, I get to communicate with other art teachers in the district. That's super helpful. So having that building start time be the same, we felt was valuable. However, it does increase the need for buses. Because we're running more students at the same time, we need to make sure that we have additional buses. So in the K-5 model, that impact is 3 additional buses and 3 drivers for about $184,000 annually. Related to buses is transportation start and end times. Because we're a unit district, we have to figure in all of our different schools and all of those transportation needs in order to make students get to buildings at the right time. So we can't do elementary separate from everybody else, which is why you see the start times and end times for the whole district. So in this K-5 model, you would have a bus drop time of about 8:05. Elementary school would start at 8:25, would end at 2:50. One of the things it does is move the start time for middle school 5 minutes earlier, and that's to provide enough opportunity to move our elementary students and get that first run of high school in. One of the important things I want to note is that we can adjust start times later as long as everybody moves. So if we wanted to move like middle school 15 minutes later, we could do that as long as we move elementary 15 minutes later and high school 15 minutes later, etc. So this would be a schedule, but again, to be clear, we can adjust it as long as everybody moves. And we have checked in with the high school with regard to athletics and extracurriculars and making sure if we move it, like what that kind of is that drop dead date for the time for the end of the day. 15 minutes wouldn't cause a problem. So that's why I'm using that as an example. So we're okay. A lot of schools in our conference get out at 3:30, we get out at 3:15, so we'd be okay. So that's just, I want to put that out there. So even though this is the schedule, you could adjust it as long as everyone adjusts.
And we'd have to also work with the association on it because it's working conditions. So that'd just be something we'd have to collaborate with them on.
Correct. Let's see. All right. So teaching and learning impacts in the K-5 model. So these are the ones we talked about in the other presentation that are the costs associated with the programming in the buildings. If we move to a K-5 model, we would eliminate departmentalization in 4th and 5th grade. Remember, departmentalization is one of the tools we use with trying to prepare students for that middle school transition, where we have them have a math teacher, they have an LA teacher, and they change classrooms. But we also noted that we are unable to do that for our language learner students because they only have a single teacher in the grade level. And moving forward, if we choose a K-5 model, we would eliminate departmentalization because we don't think it's appropriate to have a program that by design, some of our students can't participate in. So we would move everybody back to having, I guess, a more traditional 4th and 5th grade experience where they have a single teacher that teaches all 4 subjects. In order to do that, we have to provide the rest of the resources. So if I'm only a math teacher right now, I need the resources for science and social studies and language arts. So this cost represents the rest of the materials teachers would need to teach the remainder of the subject areas they don't currently teach. Supplies per new classroom, we talked about that at the beginning. So we're somewhere between 2 and 10 additional classrooms, so there's a range of cost associated. Let me clarify that. That quantity part is the amount of sections we would need. Some of them have a range. So eliminating departmentalization doesn't have a range because it's the same number of sections regardless of population, right? The number of new classrooms needed depends on what we think enrollment is gonna be, right? If we think we're gonna hit that University of Wisconsin mark, we're closer to the 2. If we think we're gonna be higher, we're moving towards the 10. So that's why there's a range of cost in there. Adding PLTW, music, and art for kindergartners is in a K-5 means adding it to 4 buildings, right? So that's what that number is. So regardless of population, I still have to add it to 4 additional buildings. It's only in 1 building right now. So we're assuming 1 building stuff goes to 1 building and then we spread it out, right? So that's the cost of adding those additional sections of kindergarten in those specials. And then here we start to consider things like if we want to do art on a cart or not, if we want to do music or STEM on a cart, then we have to purchase carts. So that's one thing that's in there. Site licenses. When we have programs that are purchased by site, we have to add sites, which adds cost. I will tell you that's not everything. Different programs fund differently. So right now, if we have a program that's per student, it doesn't change the cost because we still have the same number of students. But if we have it per site, like I pay per building, and now instead of 1 kindergarten building, I'm in 5, we have to pay those additional license fees. Libraries and the book rooms. Remember, we're taking out of the kindergarten building and we have to divide up. So the book room at the kindergarten building and the library at Plebiac have to be separated. So we're not exactly sure at this time what the cost would be. We know there'll be a cost, but it depends on how many books we're sending, how many books they have, where we're gonna move everything, what do we wanna duplicate, that kind of thing. So once we actually start breaking it apart, we'll know what those costs are. But this is a cost in both models, right? Because I'm taking something from one place and moving it to multiple. All right, so we'll cover the same information now with the partner school model. So with the partner school model, one of the things we noted is that it's more efficient in terms of the use of space. So that's why you see a difference in the number of classrooms needed between that K-5 model and the partner school model. With the University of Wisconsin projections, we wouldn't need any classrooms. And let me make a quick note about this. As we were going through the study and looking at the plans, the building plans and counting spaces, one of the things we discovered with our EARL partners is we undercounted the number of classrooms at Beach. So the initial said 20 and there's actually 22. And we probably counted, all of us educated folks must have counted 12 times to make sure we were counting the right number of classrooms. And we actually had an additional classroom at Indian Hill as well. And this is the help of having the principals involved as well, because Mr. Porton was able to say, wait a minute, you're miscounting one of my rooms here, I do have this extra room. So we were able to identify 3 additional classrooms. So if you remember in the initial presentation, it says that we need 2 classrooms in partner schools with the UW projections and 5. That's why we're now at 2 and 0, because we actually discovered, if you will, some additional spaces that were undercounted in that initial report. So I just wanted to point that out. So in this case then, that low end of the University of Wisconsin projections, we actually wouldn't need any additional classrooms. We would have a sufficient number of classrooms with the ones we have in the building or in the district, so there aren't any additional costs. In that adjusted projection, we would need some additional space too, which is that one mobile classroom, so that's the cost of a single mobile classroom. And again, because one would likely be housed on the Murphy campus, we are only looking at one set of site fees. So here again, we only need a couple of spaces. So if we didn't want to purchase a mobile and install a mobile classroom, we could move one of the specials onto a cart, or I would suggest something else, right? So we only need 2 spaces fundamentally in the district. We could probably move some things around to be able to fit that in there without forcing specials on a cart. But because I can't tell you what that exactly is right now, it would take some investigation based on the number of students who are enrolled at the time. This is to be consistent in those cost offsets. This is an option for a cost offset if we had to move that direction. With regard to transportation, the transportation cost is higher in the partner school model when the schools start at the same time without the shuttle. So the shuttle was not a super popular idea, but what it did allow us to do was start the buildings at the same time and not increase the transportation cost. But because that was unpopular, we also investigated what we called the direct route model that did not use a shuttle, that allowed buildings to still start at the same time. And so that's what we're looking at here, is the cost of that direct route, no shuttle. It would be an addition of 6 buses and 6 drivers for that cost of $368,000 annually. So school start and end times are actually exactly the same because we're using a model where schools start and end at the exact same time, and the buses are running at all the same time. So the start time between the K-5 model and the partner schools model is actually exactly the same, which means that thing I mentioned earlier about we could adjust the schedule as long as we adjust all of the start times still holds here as well. But then we also maintain the benefits I spoke of previously of having the same start time for staff across the district. Teaching and learning impacts. In the partner schools model, we would have more than one language learner classroom per grade level, which would allow us then to have our language learner students participate in departmentalization. So we would not eliminate departmentalization in this model, which means we don't incur the costs of adding the rest of the resources to those sections. We still would potentially have to outfit 2 additional classrooms, so you'll see the cost there. We do have to expand resources in PLTW music and art. But it would be 2 sections because instead of going to 5 buildings, it's going to 3 in the partner school model. So that's the difference in cost there. And then we have art carts potentially here. Again, we don't have the need for anything beyond art if that was the option we chose to go with. So there is a reduced cost, but again, it's still that all or nothing. So it's either none of them or all of them on a cart. Site licenses, there are fewer sites that we'll be transferring to. We'd be going instead of 5 to 3, so that's a slightly reduced cost there. Same thing with furniture, and then the library and the book room are still in the same bucket because we have to divide them up and see what we have and what we'll need to purchase. So we know there'll be a cost. It's just we're not quite sure what that cost is at this time. A little bit more quickly through the costs on that sense. All right, so the last part I want to discuss is impacts and considerations. The first piece here is a summary of cost by enrollment projection. So it's important to know that we have 2 different enrollment projections listed. So in order to consider costs, you have to kind of decide where you think enrollment is going to be. It's a little bit disingenuous to look at 2 classrooms K-5 in the UW model and 2 classrooms partner schools in the adjusted model because you're talking about 2 completely different enrollment projections. So those are not, yes, they're the cost for 2 classrooms, but in one case, you're saying I'm the highest possible enrollment in this projection, or I'm the lowest possible enrollment in a completely different projection. So it's not really appropriate, I guess, to say that's a same comparison, right? You kind of got to look at the green columns or the blue columns. Either I think we're going to be kind of around here for enrollment, or I think we're going to be kind of around here. And then you have your cost range based on where you think enrollment is going to end up. So based on actual kindergarten enrollment, the kindergarten trend projection, the fact that we're currently exceeding our enrollment projections in several elementary grades, and the need to add sections, we just completed staffing for elementary for next year, and we need to add a couple of sections at elementary for next year. We do not feel that we're gonna hit that UW APL enrollment. The signs do not point to that being accurate. And our kindergarten enrollment this year is case in point. We're supposed to be about 380 this year. We were at 415. So we were over quite a bit. And we don't have any reason to suspect that that's gonna change. In fact, the kindergarten trend projection from the University of Wisconsin study is actually aligned to what we're seeing in terms of our kindergarten enrollment. So we feel that the adjusted enrollment is probably closer to where we'll end up. So in considering costs again, you kind of have to identify enrollment and then pick between. We're leaning towards the adjusted enrollment projections based on what we've seen recently. So again, this is just that slide from earlier that shows you kind of where we're at. UW's kindergarten trend projection is what we're seeing with our kindergarten enrollment, and that really drives everything else, right? So how many kids come in, or how many kids move up to 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, etc. The next few slides are just additional and they're sort of like, oh, by the way, right? That's kind of what these slides are. We want to be transparent that there are kind of other options in the mix. What we provided to you is what we think is the way we should go, right? Same start times, here's what the bus costs are, etc. But there are other things, right? So just in terms of your decision making, these are just pieces that are out there. Implementing different school start times, just gonna read a couple of examples. Implementing different school start times would eliminate the need for additional buses in both models. So if you were concerned about the cost of transportation, you could say, let's do different start times. That is not preferred, right? We prefer having the same school start time for the reason I mentioned. But in the instance of, or in an effort at transparency, that is there. You could do that. We just don't, we don't prefer that. So as you go through these, there's just other options. The shuttle bus option was confusing. People thought it was complicated, they didn't like it. But as I mentioned earlier, if you had a shuttle, you could get same school start times, but people didn't like the model, right? But it's there, it's a thing. And then in terms of teaching and learning, I talked about departmentalization a little bit. I mentioned the fact that Murphy doesn't have an elevator or a cafeteria separate from its PE space. So those types of things are just things to keep in mind when you're making your decision, because they do have impacts overall. If I have to add 5 mobiles or 10 classrooms, we have to think about Murphy and how much it can hold and where else we could put classrooms in the district, right? So those are things to consider when you're going through. So again, we presented what we think, what is our preferred model in both cases, but these are additional considerations on your radar. So that ends largely my portion of the, except for questions, I guess. And so then Dr. Mendoza will be making a closing statement.
Yeah, it's just, I think you can tell, thank you for holding the button that long. A lot of time, a lot of planning, a lot of effort has gone into this. We've definitely incorporated feedback from a variety of particular groups, and I think what we have now is a before and after. I think when we first started this, we hadn't done all the planning at the granular level, at the detail level, but at that time, we were partial to the partner school model because of what we thought and some of the things that we saw. But after going through the this vetting process, multiple meetings, multiple feedback, the planning, assessing cost, our position is not changed. In fact, I think it's reinforced that we're partial to that model. With the understanding that the administration does feel that we should not have a shuttle bus. We do feel like the schools should have the same start times. We think there's things that we get from that. We think it helps our staff specifically. And I do want to say we don't believe that our specials belong on carts. Just as I see what the board has invested, I see where we've gone the last 10 years with our co-curricular and fine arts programming. If you look this year, I think at the high school for next year, we probably have more PLTW sections than we've ever had. We started out with one teacher. You as a board invested in a second classroom. Those freshmen had elementary PLTW. At some point they had it. Same thing with art. So I've always felt like a student's experience should not be based on where they go to school and which teacher they have. So I think our position with all of this is we want dedicated instructional spaces for our specials at the elementary. So that's kind of the closing comment. I think at this time, we're going to turn it over to the board for questions. And depending on the specificity of the question, we may have to have, if it's cost, Pam, you may have to come up to the front. But certainly Dr. Center has been involved with a lot of the planning. So I'm guessing she will be able to respond to many of your questions.
Yes, I'll start. I'm going to start back to the parent sessions because I did attend all but one. In those first presentations, did it not mention that if we did the partner school, there'd be no mobile classrooms? Because that's what I recall.
So in the partner schools, there was the range, right? In the original presentation, from 2 to 5. So, or for 2 was the partner schools, 5 was K-5. So there is the possibility, again, depending on enrollment, of not doing any. And then with now our found classrooms, if you will, that is the case in partner schools. There wouldn't be a need for additional mobiles.
So there is no need for additional mobiles with the found classrooms.
Again, we got to speak enrollment projections. So if we're in the
Yes.
University of Wisconsin enrollment projections.
No mobile.
Correct.
But obviously we're leaning towards the adjusted
Correct.
Round
Which
Lake enrollment.
is right around, then it would be 2 or a single mobile, 2 classrooms.
Okay.
And let me piggyback off that one just as a clarification. Based on the adjusted, what we're calling our projection, which is the higher enrollment projection than the UW projection. Basically what we're looking at is the difference between partner schools and K-5 would be partner schools would be looking at 2 new classrooms, K-5 would be looking at 10 new classrooms. Total dollars would be looking at $594K for the partner schools. We'd be looking at 2.5-ish million for the K-5 under those projections. And as a reminder, just from what I heard, and I just want to get confirmation on that, the partner school model would give us the ability to know theoretically, because we're already assuming a higher enrollment, that if that higher enrollment comes, we're not coming back here in 5 years, 6 years, and having to completely redo this again. We may still have to adjust boundaries slightly, but we're not coming back again like we did 8 years ago with Pleviac, and now that we're here, correct?
Correct. So that's actually a really good question. The partner schools model, because it puts more of the same grades in the same location, it gives us a lot more possibility for adjustment in terms of balancing that overall population than in K-5s when you have fewer sections to adjust population with.
And what I will say is with a question like that, it's absolutely the right question. I do want to say though, we have to respond to the conditions with which we're dealing. So if we see a massive uptick in enrollment, I just don't want it stated that on March 20th, 2023, you said we weren't going to do A. What it does do, without question, it gives us definitely more room to accommodate if an increase happens without coming back to you. the hope would be we wouldn't have to do that. I can tell you in the K-5 model, there's without question significantly less room and flexibility to account for that. Is that fair?
That is an excellent point, yes. If we suddenly have a massive spike in population, that would change. But within this sort of enrollment projections we're looking at and kind of that balanced change, then we're in that lane.
And again, just to clarify, I apologize, just to clarify, for the costs at the time, which is now, K-5 would be, if we stay with if we go with a K-5 project program, we're looking at a 2.5 today cost versus the partner schools, which would be a 594K.
Correct.
I want to ask a question about the boundary changes. So either way we go, there will be boundary changes probably, correct?
So that one's a little bit trickier simply because it definitely depends on where people actually live, right? So if people moved out of the Indian Hill boundary and into the Ellis boundary, even right now, that would shift, right? Because as I mentioned, Ellis has a couple of empty classrooms, so they could absorb that enrollment. Indian Hill has 0 empty classrooms, right? So that's why their kids end up getting displaced and moved across the district. So it really depends on where people actually are living at the time. But assuming the pattern stays the way it is, and that's the hard part about this, right? Because there's some of the most critical pieces are the pieces we have to predict. So assuming the population stays approximately where it's at, there is a bigger move required for the Indian Hill boundary than the other ones.
So if that didn't happen potentially, how far in advance would parents be notified?
So,
Well, I will just tell you on April 10th, depending on what the board decides to do, the work would start immediately. Because we've done a boundary change before, and there's a process we'll follow. We'll notify families in advance, but we would, once we know what the direction is, we know how we'll need to adjust.
So we're thinking potentially a year or two. Depending on how long it takes to configure it. Okay, thank you.
I had a question around cohort survival. I love that term, but cohort survival and preschool. Are we seeing an increase in preschool, which could potentially indicate that we're also going to see an increase in kindergarten, or is that just because the availability of our preschool has grown?
yeah, that's actually another good question. We do, regardless of model, we don't have enough seats in our preschool to actually clearly predict the number of students who would come into kindergarten. So if you think about it, we have right around 300 seats right now for 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds. So it's not a good predictor for us because it only ends up being about maybe half of our kindergarten population. And even with the grant and the increase, we're still going to be under we're not going to still have enough seats. So it's actually not the greatest predictor. Plus our preschool, you have to qualify, right? It's not an open preschool, so you have to have a need, an early intervention program, something like that. So again, not a predictor of the general population.
So with the addition of the mobiles, using the adjusted projection, and it looks like you're looking at Murphy, will that affect staff parking? And I know we're doing a new parking lot at Murphy this summer.
So Dr. Lamping, you might, yeah.
Because we know when we add mobiles to any site, it's going to affect staff parking and or student parking at the high school.
Yes, the if we would put mobiles at Murphy, they would be in the back. The new parking lot that is going in the front is getting an additional 20-some spots. So it should not impact any parking because all of the staff would be in the front. It is going to impact the ability to just drive through. We will be doing buses now on Greenwood. We would not be using that as a turnaround to do buses if we did our mobiles in the back of Murphy, because we would not want any traffic through the back end of Murphy.
Oh, Dr. Lampy, before you leave, with the cost of the mobiles that are listed here, obviously dependent on the soil samplings and of course the village that these would particularly go into, because we deal with different villages, these costs could potentially be higher as well.
They could rise dependent on the quality of the soil, also the timing of this. We anticipate, prices will go up, but they could go up.
In the prices that are quoted on here, is there any consideration of a 10% overage at all? Or what is the educated guess on these costs?
We did not put an overage on the cost for the actual, asphalt.
Contingency. Did you build in any? Okay.
Yeah.
Not for the actual asphalt and that, items there. I don't know for the cost of the mobile itself.
Once the Board of Education gives us direction, we would need to get mobiles right away. They are not as easily acquired as one might think. There is a premium on them. So those would be costs within the next 6 months if we need to secure those mobiles for our program.
But the cost in this document, where do we get these costs?
We utilized some of the costs from the Indian Hill installation that we just did. Both locations do have some foundation already there. Because there's asphalt already in both of the locations we identified. So, but we used the Indian Hill recent installation that we did with the one that had fire damage.
How big is that mobile? Is that a 2? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. I think we're done with operations. Thank you. So all the costs that are laid out, I know for myself, because there's costs here listed on the sheet that you handed out, Dr. Center, for teaching and learning, partner schools, the K-5 model, and then we have some cost in the packet. For me, it'd be beneficial to see this more cumulative, where it also lists the transportation cost. This does not on the sheet. For me, to get a really clear picture of the financial impact of this district, I need it all lined up. Instead of a slide here, printed here, I'd like it all together.
I'm sorry, does the summary cost include transportation?
This does not. Yeah, I want it all together, cumulative, all together.
I got you.
Not broken out in segments, but continuous.
So take transportation and get the subcategories, I guess, and take teaching and
Yeah, it's
learning.
all broken out in
Yep,
boxes.
got it.
I would like
One
one,
big chart.
you can then break it out, this is transport, but I would like it all
it.
cumulative. So the grand total at the bottom is the grand total. I don't have to take this, add this, maybe subtract that. I would like it all.
Balance sheet style.
Yes.
Okay, yep.
Please. It's just easier for me to get a clear financial picture that way.
Sure, that is actually what my original sheet looks like, so I will just produce
Well,
that for you.
that's easy then. Okay, thank you.
So I've got a question around ongoing. It seems, if I've got this correct, that we're forecasting transportation to be more expensive, and actually the overall yearly cost afterwards are gonna be more expensive ongoing, correct? And that's predominantly
For
because of
transportation.
transportation,
Correct.
no matter which model.
There are more buses and therefore drivers needed to have the same school start time in the partner school model than in the K-5 model.
If you're done with that question, Mr. Joe, we'll go over to Mrs. Klingler. Are you good? Ms. Lee, oh, go ahead.
I had wanted to know about, you had mentioned that, if we went through the K through 5, is a possibility that teachers would have to go back to the traditional experience. So teachers would be potentially teaching multiple subjects like they used to. Did we get Like, were there any thoughts from the teachers on that potentially happening?
So in fourth and fifth grade is what we're talking about, right? I would say there's a mixed view right now. There are challenges in our present system. One of the big frustrations, and rightfully so, is if I teach math this year, but the number of sections changes for fourth grade, I might next year teach LA, or I might teach math and science. And so there's sort of an adjustment based on the number of sections that is occurring that is frustrating to teachers, because I think I'm going to be math, and then nope, I'm not, I'm science. So that's understandable. The build out, which is actually part of the strategic plan in terms of transition components, right? Making sure that we have a solid transition plan between fifth and sixth grade, and making sure that we connect the pieces so that we're doing, so that we're actually identifying whether or not that model is successful in terms of transition. That's another question that's been asked, which again is something we need to make sure that we're doing. And as I noted, that is part of the strategic plan, that transition component. So there are potential, right, challenges, and so I would say it's a mixed bag. There are things that are better in the partner school model. The more stable number of sections is an example. So if I'm a math teacher, I'm likely to stay a math teacher and not become another teacher because the sections are more stable. And then it's our responsibility to make sure that we're identifying the markers in terms of like what we're looking for transition, and whether or not overall our transition plan is successful. And so that's something we'll need to make sure we're doing actually, and that's regardless of model, but especially in that departmentalized model, so that teachers feel confident about what they're doing.
Another question regarding the mobile, looking at our projections for the 5-year trend, and again using this Round Lake adjusted model. But if we look at what Wisconsin projected, we'll see a decline in enrollment. So now if we've purchased this mobile, what are our intentions if, let's say, these projections are correct, then we don't need it?
It's an excellent question. The chances that we don't have a need for extra space in this district is almost zero. We always do. And so let's, hypothetically say we purchased a mobile and it's 2 classrooms, and for whatever reason we didn't actually need it, but we installed it. We would definitely make use of it. It wouldn't sit there vacant. We would make use of it. And we have a need for collaborative space throughout the district. We have a need for meeting space. We have a need for teacher, additional space for training and all kinds of things that we really could use just generically space for. So I don't anticipate it would ever sit vacant, but I know the purchase reason for Pam.
So just as we're searching for mobiles now, many other locations are as well. We would have residual value where we could sell that back. It is a titled property. So in Dr. Center's presentation, you heard her talk about the longevity of, if we leased, at some point would we be giving something back with no value? So our anticipation is we would extend that purchase beyond its lease, so we would have some property right, some residual value to then resale that title.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Kibbens, yeah, I would park in the front row there, so you have to walk back up again.
I of course, being a social worker, I got like a couple of little quick questions. You had talked about the 5th to 6th transitions. Would you also be looking at the 2nd to 3rd grade transitions? I figured you.
Absolutely, yes. That would be a key component of planning should we go with a partner school model.
Okay, and also services and special education and ELL. You know me, I'm all over about the alphabet things. Making sure those services are available regardless where the student's at.
100%. So that's something we've been very aware of, is paying attention to our students' related services needs and making sure that those are met, again, regardless of school configuration. So whether we're K-5s or partner schools, our students will have their needs met.
Okay, one more, I swear. I wanted to thank you actually, just publicly, because Scott and I have had the benefit, because we run the Community Engagement Committee, to kind of be in this dialogue and this conversation. And just coming from somebody who doesn't understand sectioning and blocking, I appreciate your patience with our many, many questions and our continued questions. It's a big deal, so we appreciate your genuine openness about it and just educating us. So, my last question is, if we have to move the start times, have we had any feedback from the association either way on that?
I don't think when we built this plan, when the team did, we kind of tried to stay in we'd almost did backward planning. We looked at the high school time, we looked at the early childhood time, then we built everything off that. We just needed something to show comparables. We haven't really even got into that discussion, but what I will say is with the understanding that if you move one, you have to move all, we don't have a ton of flexibility because, and this may be a little bit too granular, one of the things that's a positive, but also can create a challenge is our high school is a 9-period day, right? So many high schools have 8-period days, we have a 9. So if you start getting into saying, well, let's move the high school back a half hour, it doesn't seem like a lot, but now they're getting into 3:45, 4 o'clock. And again, I'm not suggesting that athletics or co-curriculars should drive everything. It's really not that. It's about our buses, being able to transport all of our kids with 5 or 6 different bus runs. So we have probably some flexibility, but not like as much as you would think. But it's something that we certainly could talk with them about.
Make sure that Ms. Lee and Mr. DeVera, any questions?
No, not at the moment. I'm just taking it all in. I agree. I echo the sentiments. Very well prepared, well presented. So I don't have anything right now.
My questions were asked by Mr. Francisco and Ms. Klingler. So again, I thank you too for your presentation.
I have another question. Well, it doesn't necessarily pertain to the models being presented, but it does pertain to us exiting Pleviac. I want to make sure that we have a plan in exiting Pleviac, because I know this district has purchased equipment that is in that building, that the agreements and the contract that's been reviewed by finance, we make sure we take that with us.
So Dr. Lamping and Mr. Kozik and everything, that is definitely something.
I know it's not you.
No, I know, but we want to keep our stuff too, so.
So we've already started talking about that and about making sure that we do, we're going to use our services of Kim, our new, I'm looking at Dan's way back there, but our new project manager to schedule all of the things to make sure we get every piece of equipment and do a timeline on making sure we get all of our, student desks, everything out, because we're going to be doing a lot of needs for staffing in terms of moving equipment in, moving staff, teacher desks, student desks around the district. So it's all going to be very meticulously timed. We've talked already about the technology equipment, any kind of maintenance equipment that we have out there, custodial equipment. So we will be utilizing her services to schedule all of that so we can time it with all of the other work in the summer that needs to get done and schedule it by the timeline we have to be out. And I know Pam's already been in contact with and working collaboratively with the business manager over at Lake Villa so that we can make sure that we have in what will come off the walls, out of the ceilings from the, the Wi-Fi hubs, the AI phone that's in the front door, all of our things we've already started making note of so that we can communicate that.
Okay, because just as big as a move that is coming back in the district is vacating that building, and again, the investment that we put in there with technology and other belongings, making sure we keep those and we don't leave anything behind.
Yeah, we'll be taking off the hand sanitizer. Everything that we put on there will be taken off.
Just want to make sure.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Any additional questions?
I have one question. So I've been taking notes, other than the updated cost sheet requested by Ms. Negretti McGinley, is there anything else specifically that the board needs to help make an informed decision on April 10th?
I don't think anything, I can't think of, I was just gonna ask, it probably be a future agenda item, if the finance committee can get the lease from Plebiac, as we reviewed, as we end that lease, just to make sure.
Absolutely.
Sounds good. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Well presented. Thank you. Scott, did you have another question?
I do, so I was wondering, sorry, Dr. Simon. So I'm wondering if the decision is based on the model, but the model is coming with like these pieces to it. So the model comes with start time, the model comes with transportation, the model comes with each one of those pieces. Is that correct, or is it the model is then decided and then the rest of the pieces are decided along with that?
So that's a great question. So one of the things that could happen, so here's what I would say. We intend to bring forward a model on April 10th that has no shuttle buses. It has, what are the three at the end? The shuttle buses,
Specials in the classroom.
same starting and ending time. What was
Specials in their classroom.
Specials in the classroom. Theoretically, if we make that recommendation and you vote no, it might be, there could be another motion that would be, okay, well, so you vote no, you guys have a discussion, you could actually end up changing the motion with pieces of it. So our intent is to bring the model forward with those three things. Another thing that is a little bit outstanding is the starting and ending times. But what I can tell you is I don't see those deviating significantly based on what I already said. So I mean, if, again, you need to vote your conscience and you need to vote what you're comfortable with, but I can tell you I don't see a lot of room on the starting and ending times because of the volume of runs that we have to do. I think there's a little bit of play in there, but that's what our intent would be, Mr. Jewett.
Thank you. All right, then we are now to our second new business item, which is increase in personnel inventory, 1 FTE.
Hello, we have, this evening we'll be requesting the board support in posting a new position and requesting action at the April 10th board meeting for a communications coordinator. So starting in July, there will be a new position of deputy superintendent, and we'll be looking for additional support in the communications department in this new role. So as you see in the memo, the reporting structure, we will have some staff on the communications team reporting to the communications coordinator, and some staff on the team also reporting to the deputy superintendent. Within the memo, you'll also see we're looking for posting approval this evening with the anticipated position coming following the April 10th vote. We would like to fill the position if possible this school year, but within the memo you see the estimated salary and benefits amount for the 23-24 school year. We also attached the job description since it is a new position for our district.
One of the other things that was discussed in finance is I would bring in May a revised org chart for the board to see. It's, I guess, loosely connected to this, but again, I think Ms. Bennett is looking for, we're not asking for a roll call motion in the vote, but we'd like respectfully you to consider allowing her to post the position, and then we wouldn't fill it until after April 10th if the board approves it at that meeting.
So yeah, I was gonna say this was discussed in finance, and is a couple things, as Dr. Mendoza mentioned, feel the board needs a new organizational chart since there'll be a new structure come next or this fall. And then the finance committee is in support of the position and posting this as soon as possible so they can get quality candidates.
Any questions from the board? And does anyone have any objections to the go ahead and posting? Hearing no objections. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, E&L teachers.
Good evening. This board memo is a request to approve 4.0 E&L teachers for next school year, 23-24. It's important to note that when we're looking at staffing for the following school year, ISB provides us guidance on which students qualify for full-time and part-time services. And in reviewing that guidance and the linguistic needs of our students, that creates an additional 2.0 FTE at Round Lake Middle for science and social studies, and an additional 2.0 FTE at Round Lake High School for math and science. So we will be asking the board to approve these positions at the April 10th board meeting. However, we would like approval tonight to be able to post these positions as anticipated so that we can find the best quality candidates.
Again, this was discussed at finance in great detail, again, in support of obviously these positions, and again, so that they can post it as soon as possible to get quality candidates.
Hearing no objections to that? Perfect, thank you. All right, next up is RLHS Allied Soccer Sports Complex.
Good evening. We are looking to, well, we are working on our allied soccer season in order to maintain a more consistent practice and game schedule, because we all know the spring weather can be a little bit unpredictable. We would like to rent out the sports complex again this year for those practices and games.
So this was discussed at finance and reviewing the contract. Notice it had a student participation of 50. So we had asked if it's over 50, is there additional cost or what would happen? And Mrs. Cacciatore said it's more of a guideline. It's not a mandate. So if we were to exceed that, there's no additional cost. It's just to give them a guideline. But we do have a motion for this one. So we need a motion to approve the agreement between Round Lake Park District and Round Lake High School for the rental of the indoor field at the sports complex for the Allied soccer season in the amount of $1,537.50.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Larson, seconded by Ms. Lee. Any questions?
I just have a quick question relating to liability. Does our insurance cover if somebody was to get hurt there, being that it's not on school?
Yes,
Okay.
we are covered there.
And in fact, just as a quick reminder, the Park District actually requires us to provide them our certificate of liability insurance.
Which they do have.
It's actually attached. It's in the.
Yeah, it's all in there, so. It's always our first question for finance.
Hearing no other questions, we will go to a roll call, please.
Mrs. Klingberg?
Yes.
Ms. Lee?
Yes.
Mr. Francisco?
Yes.
Mrs. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. Jewett?
Yes.
Mrs. McGinley?
Yes.
Mr. De Vera?
Yes.
Motion carries. And you're next.
So the next one I believe is the DJ for prom. This is a new DJ that we have not used yet. He comes highly recommended.
No, it's fine. We'll do that one and then we'll go.
All right, thank you.
Sorry.
Oh, you're great. Keep going.
So it's a new DJ that comes highly recommended from other schools in our area. And he has said he will do everything we want him to do and more.
So this was just a discussion, and again, it was on the finance committee agenda, reviewed the contract, and everything looks good, and we hope the students have a great prom.
All right, hearing nothing else on the DJ, then we'll move to Team Select Healthcare.
Good evening. In 2021, the board approved healthcare services for a student that we have at CEDAL who has significant medical needs. Between then and now, that original company is no longer able to provide those services. So Team Select Healthcare would now take over providing the nursing services for that student.
Any questions from the board?
So again, this was on the finance committee agenda, and this was reviewed, the contract was reviewed, and all is well, and of course, we want to make sure the student is receiving the services that they need.
In all transparency, it's important for the board to know that these services have already begun because we wanted to make sure that the student can continue receiving services at CEDAL, but just to be transparent with the board.
No, thank you, Dr. Epgar, yes, because obviously we didn't want to lapse in services for the student.
And just as a reminder, these are actually required services for us to provide it anyway, correct?
That is correct.
Right. And with that, I need a motion to approve the contract with Team Select Healthcare to meet the unique medical needs of our student and CEDAL programming in the amount of $20,230.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Francisco, seconded by Ms. Lee. Any additional questions? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Klingler?
Yes.
Ms. Lee?
Yes.
Mr. Francisco?
Yes.
Mrs. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. Dewitt?
Yes.
Mrs. McGinley?
Yes.
Mr. Tavera?
Yes.
And motion carries.
Thank you.
All right, next up is public comment. As always, members of the public may participate in public comment during regular board meetings by attending in person or by submitting an electronic public comment form. Please note that in all instances, speakers are limited to 3 minutes of time. Electronic public comments will be accepted up until noon on the day of the regularly scheduled meeting, and the public commenter will be contacted to confirm identity. Once confirmed, the electronic public comment will be provided to all board members in written form. A link to electronic public comment can be found inside the board documentation. There were no electronic public comments for tonight's meeting, so I would like to open it up. Do we have any public comment? Hearing no public comment, no one stepping up, thank you very much, and we will now move on to positive occurrences.
Okay, the choir concert, they were awesome. It was just awesome.
Concur. I was gonna leave with that, I'm not gonna lie.
I'll just throw out there, we've got Round Lake Music with their trip to New York City coming up at what? 0300?
It will be 3:45 on Wednesday morning.
That's 03:45 for, oh my God, it's early.
Yes, it is.
Please wish me luck.
I just want to add to that. I just want to thank Ms. Cacciatore and their team and our teachers, fine arts teachers. I think last week, we had events running like multiple days in a row, and it's just so nice to be able to seem like we were pre-pandemic with all of our planning and activities. And I think every one of those sessions was packed. I mean, we had to put chairs on the floor, and we got to see our nice new gym floor cover being used properly. But really, just the amount of time, effort, and planning that go into something like that with Ms. Cacciatore, the team, our fine arts teachers. It's really clear that we value fine arts in Round Lake, and it's really special for our kids. So it was really heartwarming to be there at those events. So.
Yeah,
I was just gonna say, it was so nice to see the other parents and seeing the younger kids with the older kids, and it was really great to see them.
Yeah, as I say, again, it was nice to see all the fine arts, and then, of course, just to thank the fine arts boosters as well. Those are our parents who are helping support those kids, and then just to say, I know the scholarships have opened for fine arts and our athletics, so hopefully lots of students apply.
It was also really great to see the 8th grade, what was it, the incoming freshman activity evening where everyone got to come in and all the clubs, athletics, activities, the whole 9 yards, just showing the wide spectrum of availability that we have at the high school and throughout the whole district. Because a lot of these same clubs that they're joining at the high school, they've been doing it at the middle school and even in the elementary schools. So it's just great seeing that and getting everybody up and going forward.
I'd like to shout out to the SEL, because the SEL department, because on Saturday, my son and I were working on a project and I was really frustrated. And then on the way to take him to work, he shared with me that you were frustrated, you were in the yellow zone. And I said, really? He said, yes. And so there's 4 zones. So he was actually able to tell me about the blue zone, the green zone, the yellow zone, and the red zone, and what I needed to do for each one of those zones. So, touche. I'm learning too. Thank you.
All right, hearing no additional positive occurrences, we'll move to future agenda. I know we already had the one earlier. Any additional future agenda items at this point? Hearing none?
Actually, I just want to let you know, I'm in the green zone, so I'm ready to learn.
All right, then we will now take a motion to convene in closed session as permitted by statute 5 ILCS 120/2 for the purpose of discussing the following employment matters, 5 ILCS 120/2 C1.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Klingler, seconded by Mrs. Larson. Any questions? Roll call, please.
Mr. Tavera?
Yes.
Mrs. McGinley?
Yes.
Mr. Jewett?
Yes.
Mrs. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. Francisco?
Yes.
Ms. Lee?
Yes.
Mrs. Klingler?
Yes.
All right, the motion carries, so we will reconvene in closed session. So that will end tonight's session. We thank you very much for your time, for your attendance here locally as well as online, and we will be back with you in 2 weeks. Thank you all and have a great evening.